by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ms. Catherine Hambleton. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Catherine Hambleton with NASA's Office of Communications. At approximately 9:15 a.m. Eastern Time today, NASA's Space Launch System rockets and Orion spacecraft for the Artemis 1 mission were secured inside the vehicle assembly building at the agency's Kennedy Space Center in Florida ahead of the arrival of Hurricane Ian. The 4-mile journey from Launch Pad 39B began shortly after 11 p.m. Monday. Here to talk with us about the decision to roll back and the preparations for the storm, preparations at Kennedy for the storm are Janet Petro, Center Director at Kennedy, to provide a big picture look at what hurricane preparations underway are at Kennedy, and Jim Free, the Associate Administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, to talk about the agency's decision to roll the rocket and spacecraft back to the vehicle assembly building. We'll have a few opening comments from our speakers, and then we'll take questions. Again, reporters on the line can enter star 1 to be entered into the question queue at any time. First, we'll hear from Janet Petro. Janet?
Hi, thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon to everyone. So there's definitely a lot going on at the KSC Multi-User Spaceport. I'm going to start with, we had our first Emergency Decision Team meeting. This is EDT. The team consists of KSC leadership along with both contractor and partner management. We first met last Friday to discuss the storm, and we've met several times over the weekend to discuss the track, the strength, the intensity of the storm, and the posture that we are at KSC. As far as emergency preparedness, of course, safety of the workforce and property is the #1 priority, and this is reflected in all of our planning. We have a hurricane plan that applies to all NASA and contractor organizations, as well as our launch partners and our NASA facilities located on the Space Force Station. So I think, HURCONs are declared based on the amount of time of damaging winds prior to arrival, so specifically 50 knots. So HURCON 4 was declared yesterday, Monday morning, where we are expecting the arrival of winds of more than 50 knots to be within 72 hours. At that time, notification and preparations were started with communications to every organization on our center, and we began identifying personnel who would be riding out the storm as members of our ride-out team. We had another EDT meeting this morning at 9 a.m., and we did declare and go into HURCON 3 this morning. And again, this is arrival of winds forecast to be within 48 hours. HURCON 3, where we're at now, is when the bulk of the hurricane work happens. We go about securing our facilities, our property, our equipment, and hopefully the ride-out team's members are able to go home and prepare their homes for the arrival of the storm. I do project that if the storm stays on its track, we would be declaring HURCON 2 tomorrow morning or earlier if necessary. We do have a EDT call this evening at 6 to assess the storm and what's happening with it. And this phase, HURCON 2, is where all the non-essential personnel are released and sent home. It's really done in a very orderly fashion once all the tasks that we have to do on center have been completed. And then when the damaging winds are expected to be within 12 hours, HURCON 1 would be declared, and then the ride-out team would report to the center to ride out the storm. So currently, center-wide, our various programs are buttoning up the facilities to protect their equipment and the commodities and prevent loose objects from becoming projectiles. And the center leadership team will continue to hold their emergency decision team meetings likely twice a day from here on out. And we meet with the program leads and partners coordinating our activities and staying ahead of the storm. Kennedy's Emergency Ops Center is the focal point for coordination and response of all these activities. I did want to mention activities after the storm passes. Our EOC, the Emergency Ops Center, would declare a weather clear, and then they would do a ride around the center and do an initial assessment of the center. If needed, because the amount of damage from this assessment is extensive, our damage assessment and recovery team would then be called in, and then they would do a more thorough assessment of damage to any structures or infrastructure and determine whether it's safe to allow folks to come back on site. And when it is determined to be safe, an all clear would then be given for folks to come back on and resume operations. And we have various means of communicating this message, including our emergency management system messages. I'll note that we are tied at the hip with the 45th Delta. They do make their decisions on the HRCAN status of their workforce and property, and we make ours, but I'm in direct contact with the Commander, General Purdy. We communicate at least a couple times a day, and our emergency management team is in constant contact with the 45th team. So as far as the programs, I'll just note first for Artemis, you noted the rollback decision was made and the vehicle is safe in the VAB now. Our planning is in lockstep with the Exploration Ground Systems Program Manager. I attended the daily board meetings when all the Artemis decisions were made, and the program attends the EDT meetings and bring up issues, and we coordinate activities in this forum. I'll also note that approximately at 11:45 today, a fire was reported in the vehicle assembly building. Employees were evacuated, and there were no reported injuries. The VAB is now fire safe. Personnel are back inside working, and the Artemis vehicle was never at risk. And investigation as to the cause of that, it was a panel on the south side of the VAB, but we'll be doing the investigation, provide updates as we have them. I'll just note on commercial crew, the flight readiness review was conducted yesterday, and impacts of the storm to these operations was also discussed. Both the commercial crew program and SpaceX attend our EDT meetings, so we coordinate at that meeting as well. And of course, their launch activities will depend heavily on the storm and any damage that it causes at our center. Finally, just on the launch services program, they have prepared the Psyche spacecraft to weather the storm, and their facilities at Hangar AE and the PHSF are also ready as well. Just a couple notes on the workforce. Guidance is being prepared to send out to the workforce through Center Director Communications. Our supervisors are going to be approving annual leave if employees need it to help prep their homes or families for the storm, the impending storm. We are encouraging our civil service employees to telework instead of reporting in on site in the next couple days. And employees, there's a number of civil service employees already with telework agreements. They're expected to just continue working at their telework site. And let me see, finally, our contractors and partners are also planning for the impending hurricane and providing specific guidance to their workforce. So thank you. Standing by for any questions.
Thank you. We'll go to Jim Free next.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks thanks so much for being here and for your interest in what we're trying to do as we head back to the moon. I do want to thank Janet for her partnership in all this. She talked about being in our board meetings and really bringing the center perspective to our decision-making process, so thank her for that. I also want to thank NOAA and the National Hurricane Center for their guidance and just the sheer amount of data that they put out there for everyone. Obviously, it helps us directly in our decision making, and that was fed to us through the 45th Space Launch Delta that Janet mentioned. Both Mark and Melody there were great every day, just giving us options, understanding where the storm's heading. As we were, really outside that in a pretty uncertain state, as you saw stuff move around, they brought a lot of certainty to it for us. And I know all of us at Cross Exploration Systems Development are thinking of the folks in Florida, not just our NASA and our contractor folks, but everybody there as this storm heads their way. We did really, I will tell you, take every one of our decisions very seriously, looking at the data from top to bottom, both the data of the storm, what our vehicle can handle, when our windows to do certain events were. So we did take each one of those decisions very seriously. I know last time our folks talked to you, we were coming out of the tanking test and looking at the 27th for a launch date, really looking at it from what were the predictions for weather that day, and if we didn't go, could we get back in time based on what we knew about the storm then. We had a meeting early Saturday morning where it was pretty clear we needed to give up on the 27th. The weather was rough, and trying to get back in the higher winds was going to be a challenge for us. We did continue to meet throughout Saturday and Sunday, trying to keep an eye on could we make the 2nd, and that became a trade of where was the storm going to be and what were the conditions. And in addition, if it got worse, did we have a window in which we could come back to the VAB? And the return trip and the outbound trip from the VAB are really driven. We've talked about the cycles on the vehicle, but they're also driven by lightning and winds. So we had 2 real windows where we could leave the pad and come back, and one was real early Monday morning, and the other was late Monday night, early Tuesday morning. And so Sunday night we met, and still some uncertainty in the storm. We spent a lot of time talking about what the vehicle can handle. We have a specification for called the design specification for natural environments. We call it Disney. And we had a lot of discussion about the tropical storm force winds, the hurricane force winds, what could we take and for what duration. And we felt like if we could give ourselves another 8 to 10 hours of look at the storm and get a little bit more certainty, we did still have a window in which we could roll back where the lightning and winds were going to be okay. And then in that first forecast early Monday morning, it became clear that the tropical storm force winds duration and the hurricane force wind duration predictions for KSC, for Kennedy, were I think they had gone up by at least a factor of 2. So we met Monday morning and said, hey, let's take advantage of this opportunity to roll back where the lightning was going to be within our specifications, which that window opened about 11 o'clock last night. So I can assure you that we had a lot of data put on the table, both about the vehicle, both Space Launch System and Orion, and weather data to look at. So we waited, I'd say, about as long as we could, but still had a window to keep the vehicle safe and get back to the VAB. And as you heard, that's where we are now. Our next step are really to look at all the options that we have on the table. Each of them have trade-offs that go with them. The team obviously began thinking about that Monday after we made the decision to come back. One of the things we, as you all know, we need to do is the work on the flight termination system batteries so that we're ready to go the next time we have an opportunity to get out there. So we'll hear from the team on what those options are. Right now, I hope our team is focused on. Obviously, there's some folks getting the data. So with that, Catherine, I'll turn it back to you for any questions.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from reporters on the line. Those on the phone can press *1 to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can press *2 if you'd like to be removed from the queue. Your lines are on mute now, and the operator will open and close your mic when we come to your question. And, of course, please state to whom your question is addressed, and please keep it to one question so we can get to as many of your fellow reporters on the line as possible. Our first question is from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you. For Jim, of all your options on the table, is there any chance or hope of getting out for a launch by the end of October? Does it look like November 12th is going to be your earliest shot at another attempt? And quickly for Janet, how close was the fire today to the actual rocket? Thanks.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Marcia. I guess I'll take the first part of that question. I don't think we're going to take anything off the table. Like I say, we need to look at what all the trade-offs are. Getting into some of these volumes is difficult. Getting into and out of. So where we need to get to for the FTS change-out is not simple. So I don't want to say it's off the table, but I also recognize it's September 27th, and getting back out to the pad and trying to get there may be a challenge. We do have some work we need to do around Orion eclipses, so that limits us a little bit in this upcoming window. So I think I'll just throw it in the trade space as still something we're considering, but it may be difficult. But I've seen this team do challenging things in the past, and I won't write it off, but it is going to be difficult.
Thank you. Our next question is from Chris Davenport of the Washington Post.
I think, actually, Catherine, I think she had a second part of that to Janet about how close did the fire get to the vehicle.
Yeah, so I'll just pipe in there. I don't have the exact distance. It was on the wall of High Bay 3, so a good distance from the actual vehicle itself, but I don't have an exact reference point. But, you recognize with the mobile launcher and all that surrounding it, so it was a good distance.
Thank you. All right, now we'll go to Chris Davenport with the Washington Post.
Thanks. I guess this is for Jim. I just wonder if you have any concerns about the rocket or spacecraft, given that it had been outside, exposed to the elements for something like 6 weeks there, and if that, how much work you're going to have to do there in order to get it ready to make these launch windows.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I wouldn't say concerns. It's something we look at. We're always doing photographic surveys of the vehicle. Sometimes we'll see a little bit of foam debonded or some insulation that may be loose. So I think, as I mentioned, we have pretty good specs on the natural environments that the vehicle has to withstand. I'm sure when we get the platforms extended, whatever platforms we do extend, we'll get a close-up look. We'll get views from other platforms at other parts of the vehicle. So I wouldn't say concerns. We'll certainly make sure it's in good shape, though, before we were to roll back out.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kristen Fisher of CNN.
Thank you. My question is for Jim. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson was actually on CNN this morning, and he kind of echoed what you were saying. You said late October possible, but more likely would go in the window in the middle of November. So if we look at that window in the middle of November, there are a lot of launch windows in the midnight to 2 a.m. time frame, which would be like a nighttime launch. Can you just talk a little bit about what NASA's preference is for a daytime versus nighttime launch and how that would factor into when you guys decide to give this another attempt? Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. It's like you're looking at my computer screen right now with the times that we have to launch in there. I think our preference is to launch in the daylight. I think we feel like the visuals that we get from our long-range tracking cameras are of benefit to us. We do have obviously some ways we can view the vehicle if we were to launch in the dark. I think we look at the risk versus benefit trade. So our preference is probably a daylight launch, but we won't rule out the nighttime launch either.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lauren Grush of Bloomberg.
Hi, thanks so much. My question is for Jim. I'm wondering if we can go into more detail about the flight termination system and what you need to do with it now that you're back in the VAB. Where exactly is it? What is the exact process for replacing and testing the batteries to prep them for flight? And is this replacement process what ultimately takes the longest for turning the vehicle around? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So obviously the boosters have their own batteries, and then the core stage we get into through the intertank, and that's with the platforms there, it's easy to get to, but as soon as you open the door and go into the volume, that's where you take some risk. So in changing them out is just changing out the batteries. I won't say it's simple, but the team understands how to do it, and obviously they've installed them previously. So I don't see it as something that's complex. And is it the longest lead item? I think it really depends on what we decide to do to turn the vehicle, and that's what the KSC ground team, along with the Orion team, we have a number of limited life items that we have to go back through and decide what we want to change out. So I can't tell you that is the longest lead item. I can say that's part of the list that we're going through of things we need to look at.
Thank you. Our next question is from Joey Buzette of Reuters.
Hey, thank you. Quick question for Janet. I know there's an investigation into the fire going on, but can you say what was happening in the area when the fire started? And I know, the vehicle wasn't at risk or anything, but was what could have started the fire related to rolling SLS back into the building? And then also for Jim, can you just kind of give a breakdown of the limited life items that you plan to look at? Now that SLS is back in the building? I know, FTS you said was one of them, but what other kind of things are you looking to check off the list while it's in there? Thanks.
Okay, so I'll start. So, of course, the Artemis was brought into the VAB, and they were in the process of, securing and doing the disconnects in there. I'm told it was a 40-volt electrical panel on the wall of the high bay 3 that caught fire. I don't know what actually caught fire, whether it was a breaker or short or whatever at this point. I know there was only when the VAB was evacuated, there was only a handful of people in there. So I really don't know if I could speculate any more on what actually caused the fire. But it was again no damage to the vehicle, nothing close to the vehicle. The vehicle was never at risk, and of course all the personnel were safely evacuated. They're all back in there working hard now.
And then I guess to the second part of your question, Joey, I think obviously FTS, like you mentioned, we have a list of I'd say about 20 things that we're looking at that have different durations in which we have to revisit them. We're always looking at batteries in general. Obviously, we're looking at some of the hypergauss storage on the service module. We want to make sure that we're staying on top and understanding the long-term implications of that. Any of the soft goods, for instance, in the service module. So a lot of this is analytical. We have some things on ICPS we'll always look at to make sure that our United Launch Alliance partners are satisfied with where they're at on some of their hardware relative to pressure transducers. So it's a whole list of things, and each element takes a look at it and evaluates at those increments, which vary based on the element themselves. So I think it'll be part of the planning that I mentioned, that the team will decide what we need to do to position ourselves best for future launch periods.
Thank you. Our next question is from Michael Sheets of CNBC.
Hi, everybody. In terms of and I believe this question is for Jim Free, but in terms of the likelihood of a mid-November launch, I was wondering if you could just distinct down why a mid-November launch would be more likely. Is it a combination of the factors that you're looking at right now and rolling back onto the pad? Maybe you could just give me the specifics on why that would be considered more likely. Thanks.
Yeah, I think if I take the fact that it's September 27th, we just got back to the VAB. We're hooking up to get the vehicle safety, and we need to keep purges on things for all elements of the vehicle. We're going to have a few days where folks are going to be making sure that they're safe, their families are safe, and by the way, credit to the ride-out crew that is going to stay there and make sure the entire center is safe, but certainly make sure Artemis is good. And if we're looking at early next week for the team to come back, you're talking October 3rd, and our window opens back up, our launch period, opens back up on the 17th. It's just a challenge to think, can we get in there, get the volumes opened, and say we can turn and get back out there for another launch attempt. We don't want to go out too fast, and then we're stuck in a situation where maybe we didn't get to all the limited life items we wanted to look at because we were trying to get back out there. These are all the trade-offs folks are making, and we want to be respectful of our range requirement that we have in place. So I think that those are the trades that we're talking about that says, hey, we're going to be into October. Can we turn and get back out there and give ourselves the best shot to launch in this launch period or the next one?
Thank you. Our next question is from Bill Harwood of CBS News.
Yeah, hi. This is for Jim, and it's just a follow-up on an earlier question. Is the FTS waiver thing, is that done at this point? In other words, when you roll back out, whenever that is, how many days will the batteries be good for again, which would obviously figure into what you were just talking about, October versus, later. If you got out in October and didn't go, the waiver is still there. So how much time do you expect to have on the batteries whenever you roll back out, based on your current understanding of where the Air Force is, the Space Force is?
Yeah, I think Bill, I probably will follow up with you on that one. Our requirement before was 25 days. We worked with the range closely, and they were kind enough to give us the waiver, which we got the day after the tanking test, and I think our assumption's 25, but let me follow up with you on that.
Thanks.
Thanks. Our next question is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Hi, thanks for doing this, and best of luck to everyone there in Florida with Ian coming in. Jim, just kind of a philosophical question. You started stacking operations for this vehicle back in November 2020 with the boosters, and then you completed the entire stack almost a year ago on October 21st. How concerned should we be about the hardware? I know you've talked about life-limited items. You're looking at about 20 different things. Obviously, I don't think NASA envisioned Artemis 1 being in this configuration for 11 months, and now we're probably looking at maybe 13 months before the total in terms of being stacked before the next launch. Is there a sense of how long it can remain viable sort of in this configuration? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That's a great question, and as I look at that list of 20 or so things, each one has certain assumptions that go into it, certain durations across which we need to revisit it. And I can tell you that from asking questions probably a couple months ago myself about some of that, I think the team evolves their thinking as each period that particular limited life item, as it progresses through that. It's not just to check the box. Yeah, I stayed another 30 days. I think I'm good based on my other set of assumptions. I think they'll always update the assumptions so that the analysis, in most cases, the analysis we're doing to clear ourselves and get comfortable with those limited life items are a function of the hardware itself, but also the duration in which it's been stacked. So I think I've seen it continue to evolve each time we've come across it, and I would expect the team to keep doing that.
Thank you. Our next question is from Elizabeth Howell of Space.com.
Ourselves and get comfortable with those limited life items are a function of the hardware itself, but also the duration in which it's been stacked. So I think I've seen it continue to evolve.
Guys, Elizabeth Howell from space.com.
Thank you. Our next question is from Elizabeth Howell at space.com.
And get comfortable with the limited life items.
Elizabeth, can you hear us?
The hardware itself, but also the duration in which it's been stacked. So I think I've seen it continue.
All right, I think we're having some audio issues with Elizabeth. So, Elizabeth, if you can hear us and you can rejoin the queue, please do that. Otherwise, we'll move to Mark Carreau of Aviation Week and Space Technology.
Great. Thank you very much. This might be for Jim Free, but also for the Kennedy director. Congress has not yet come together on a continuing resolution for for budget spending and a potential government shutdown starting October the 1st. And I wonder how much uncertainty does that project? Would you be able to continue your activities, or would you not be exempted? You would have to stop.
I mean, I'm certainly happy to answer it, although just hearing like the thing when you never want to hear your own voice played back to you, and then everybody got to hear it 3 times. Yeah, I think from our perspective, we certainly will work with our chief financial officer and her organization to get ourselves what we hope to be priority to keep working, and that'll work through the rest of the executive branch. But our hope is that we'll be able to keep working on Artemis 1. As far as the overall KSC, I'll let Janet answer that.
Yeah, I would just add that typically what happens, and even now, there's already some thinking and planning going on in the event that what you just talked about occurs, and that is a lapse of appropriation. So that thinking, planning kind of going on in the background, and we would identify the mission critical type activities that absolutely need to continue. We would put that forward to the agency, who would put that forward, and typically those are approved. And so for us here at Kennedy, we'd of course put in for Artemis Crew 5, and we have a couple science missions coming up at the end of the year at Vandenberg that would be critical work that we would need to continue. But typically that's the process. I don't ever recall not getting permission to go ahead and continue on once a critical mission operation has been identified.
Thank you. Our next question is from David Curley of the Discovery Channel.
Thanks very much. Jim, a couple of questions. First, on the limited life items, I take they're priority items. Do you want to get out as quick as possible, so you take the top 5? And did I hear you correctly on the termination? You have to go through the tank to change those out? Thank you.
Yeah. So there's not a priority. The limited life items are set by how often the engineering team decided they needed to be revisited. So it could be every 30 days, 60 days, 365 days. So it's kind of I'll say a running clock of things. Some of them are analytically, some of them are actual hardware measurements. The FTS, as we mentioned, are hardware elements. And as far as we go through the inner tank, so it's the space between tanks, not the tank itself, where that hardware is.
Thank you.
Thanks, and we do have some diagrams online so that you can see exactly where the inner tank is in terms of the core state itself. Our next question is from Jim McDade of 1819 News.
Thank you very much, and everyone stay safe during the storm, please. I wanted to know a little more about the flight termination system batteries. Are those in a single rack and then wired to the termination devices, and are those voltages of those batteries monitored continuously?
Yeah. So
is that how? Yeah. What does Space Force base their decision on? Are they monitoring? Are you sharing that readings on those batteries with them?
Yeah. I probably won't get too much into the design of them. We measure the state of health of those batteries after they're installed, and the analysis that we had provided the Space Launch Delta early on in the design set how long they decided how long before they had to be measured again and their state of charge. That's where the 25 days comes from. We worked with them based on knowing the batteries and their design to allow us to get the waiver that we got last week. That's how we got the extension. But we're operating on that initial design that says after 25 days they require us to retest it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Nicole Mortiaro of CBC.
Hi there, Nicole Mortiaro, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Jim, I know you had mentioned that, October was a possibility, not off the table, but I wanted to know, what is the lead time between rolling out to the pad and a launch? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we've continued to learn. Our launch director, Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, and her team have learned how to optimize our time at the pad. So early on, from the time we rolled out for the first wet dress till we rolled out the last time, we found improvements to shorten that time at the pad, moving equipment in a different manner so that it wasn't subject to winds, doing things in different sequences or different parallels. So we started about 10 days. I won't put a number on where we've improved to, but we have improved. I think we demonstrated a little bit of that the last time, down into the 7-8 day time frame. So they'll continue to look at it. For instance, when we were trying to decide when we were going to move back this time, Charlie and her team were able to do a lot of advanced work to get us positioned to move back a little bit sooner, and we waited till the last minute to break three of the final three connections, which are absolutely critical. We waited those till the last minute and then broke them, and before you know it, we were rolling a few hours later. So every time we go out, we've learned, and those time frames I gave you is, I'd say, we're our starting point, but we get better every time.
Thank you. Our next question is from Manuel Manzanti of Debate.
Hi, how are you? Manuel Manzanti from Debate. A question for Jim. I guess this is a good opportunity to recharge some of the batteries of the CubeSats on board, and I understand that some of them can be done via cable. But my question is there any other CubeSat that needs to be removed from the ICPS?
We're not in a position to remove any. I think whether or not we charge those certainly is something that's important to us. We can charge a number of them as part of our standard process. I would expect us to put that as a high priority now that we're back in the VAB. The remainder of the CubeSats, I think, as we've talked before, have thresholds that they'll cross based on that initial charge that they were given. They may take a little bit longer to charge once they're ejected and in orbit because they have gone lower than originally predicted based on our launch date. But I'd expect us to get in there and try and charge those to give them the best chance to get that great science.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I'm showing in the queue. So thank you all for joining us today. You can listen to a replay of this teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at nasa.gov/Artemis-1 later this afternoon, and follow along at our blog for updates after the storm clears at blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis. With that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll continue to monitor the weather, and our thoughts are with the teams along the Gulf Coast. Thank you for joining us.